Welcome to the Vertical MRO Podcast, where we dive into the world of helicopter maintenance, repair, and overhaul. In each episode, we talk with the technicians, engineers, and experts who keep helicopters flying. Because at the end of the day, no maintenance, no mission.
Went in to take care of the deuce, had a 150-hour inspection to do on one of the engines. There's evidence we got a fuel leak back here on the manifold. We didn't have any seals in stock, and so we had to ground the aircraft hard time for the next day or so until we get seals for that manifold. That afternoon, we get a flight request for potential drowning. Flight team comes out and says, "Hey, are we good to go?" And I said, "Nope, we're hard down, we're grounded." And there wasn't another helicopter probably within 100 miles at that time in Central Oregon. Turned out it was a 5-year-old boy, and I never knew, of course, had the aircraft been available, would the outcome been better, because he ended up being brought in and he didn't make it. He'd fallen in an irrigation canal and died. And always struck me heavy on, could I have done better to change that event? So that afternoon, I close off my shift and I go home, and I had the luxury of my 5-year-old boy coming to the door to greet Dad and give me a hug.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a heartbreaking moment, thinking that some other dad out there doesn't have a 5-year-old boy today.
Yeah.
That really set me down the course of, as a mechanic, I have two primary responsibilities. One, the aircraft must be airworthy. That's a non-negotiable. It must be airworthy. The second is it needs to be mission ready, available for service at the highest rate possible. And a component of that mission readiness is my actions, my preparations as a mechanic. And recognizing on this particular event, the lack of a handful of $5 seals is what kept us out of service and possibly kept us from making that flight. It set me down the path of, how do I change my actions? How do I change the program's processes? How do I influence my employer's process of how do you support maintenance? And so that moment of realizing I had possibly an influence on that child's survival really made me very, very serious and committed to doing better.
Welcome to the Vertical MRO Podcast, brought to you by Vertical HeliCASTS and in partnership with Vertical Magazine. In this 2-part Vertical MRO Podcast series, Faith Ortega and I have an engaging conversation with Dale Neubauer, an AMP and CEO of HeliLadder, and Drew Benton Jr., the owner of Helicopter Maintenance Solutions. During the conversation, they explore their journeys in the helicopter community. They discuss the professional challenges faced by helicopter technicians, the importance of teamwork and communication, and the critical nature of ensuring aircraft are airworthy. Dale talks about how his experiences in the helicopter air ambulance segment impacted his personal and professional life. He shares a personal story you won't want to miss that highlights the impact of maintenance on patient outcomes and the lessons learned from both successes and failures in the field. Dale talks about the motivation for he and his wife Susie to create and launch HeliLadder in 2015. Starting from their garage with a shared vision to improve aircraft maintenance safety and efficiency, Dale's 30 years of experience in aircraft maintenance provided the foundation for creating the world's first modular and portable workstand. Driven by a passion for changing how maintenance is performed, Dale and Susie's work at HeliLadder continues to prioritize safety, comfort, and quality. Dale's background and commitment underscore the company's mission to provide safe, efficient, and reliable aircraft maintenance, making a tangible difference in the aviation industry through innovative solutions and unwavering dedication. Thank you to this episode's sponsors, Robinson Helicopter Company, Vertical Aviation International, and HeliLadder. Hey, welcome to the Vertical MRO Podcast. I'm today's host, John Gray. Really excited to be here. Anytime I get a chance to record with Faith Ortega, I'm stoked. You're freshly back from a trip. How are you? How was the trip?
It was awesome. I made the mistake of not allotting myself a day to chill out, and I just hit the ground running. But we're here. We're caffeinated. We're ready to go.
So you went on vacation, and then you came right back, and the next day you're back at work?
Oh yeah, went straight to work and then flew and did lessons in the afternoon, and yeah, I haven't had a single day yet. I'm like, tomorrow I'm so stoked to have a half day. So.
Yeah, I think anytime we go on vacation, it's tough when you got to the very next day after you fly in, turn around and go back to, especially on an international trip. So thank you for being here. We'll keep you caffeinated and make this conversation a lot of fun. This is a conversation that I think is really, really interesting, because the conversation's going into an area where I think sometimes we look for some really complex solutions as far as work safety and and morale and all these things. And sometimes those solutions are right in front of us in a way that we don't often recognize. And Dale, you've come up with some unique solutions that's improved the industry in a whole host of ways. Those solutions that I was referring to are things that you've created. And I'm interested to hear, how you've come up with these ideas and how you've manufactured the things that you've done. So excited to get into that with you. And what I'm referring to, Dale, is the founder of HeliLadder. The concept that you come up with and developed is really cool. Again, the story behind it. So I'm excited to get into that. And then to help with that, Drew and Dale, I think you guys have met in the past. Faith, so it's an honor to have you on as well. So looking forward to talking to you all. For the first line of business, what I'd like to do, Dale, is just start with you. Tell us about yourself and kind of how you found yourself in aviation.
I'd say the entry into aviation was a little bit slow, wasn't planned. I was not exposed to aviation as a youngster by any means. I was not in my thought process as a child or as a young man to go into aviation initially. I was, however, brought up in a family with a father who was a retired chief petty officer in the Navy. He was an engine room, and he had the ability to fix just about anything. So I was brought up being exposed to doing brake jobs on cars, pulling apart carburetors, you name it. It was just kind of part of the upbringing, was fixing things. And it really wasn't until as a young adult that I started gravitating towards an aviation career. I had worked on motorcycles, worked on heavy equipment prior to that, but it was a slow progression. Really, that started as I started getting maybe a little bit bored with motorcycles and heavy equipment and wanted something a little bit more technical, something a little bit more advanced, and that started that process.
So, at what point in those early days did you go beyond the flashlight holder for your dad and the person that's going out and grabbing the stuff to where you realized, hey, I've got some mechanical aptitude here and I can actually do this?
It was certainly, as a teenager, helping him was front and center. It wasn't until I acquired an old antique Harley 1960 Panhead as a very young adult. That machine required constant care and attention. And that kind of started me with the interest of how do you really keep equipment reliable and functional. I eventually went to a motorcycle school in Daytona and started on the path as a motorcycle mechanic initially.
Yeah, it's cool. Faith, I know you can identify with his story, and what's interesting is I feel like most kids today have a hard time in that area because, from my perspective, a lot of the vehicles that exist are difficult to work on. There's so many electronics that are involved. It's not like some of the older vehicles where you can go out and look over your dad's shoulder and kind of learn based on what your dad's doing. Now it's much different. So it's kind of a disservice, I guess, to the kids. Plus, we live in a consumer society where a lot of stuff isn't fixable. It's designed to kind of be thrown away and not fixed. So that experience you had, I think, is really cool. Faith, for you had a very similar experience, right? With your upbringing and your exposure.
Yeah, I didn't have, my dad wasn't in aviation either. I didn't have anybody, that was really that type of a tie. But my dad, his, pastime wasn't rebuilding cars either, even though that's what he did during the day. He restored old jet boats. And so I was like, okay. And we didn't even live near the ocean. Like, we lived near the Missouri River and we lived near the Ozarks and a couple different lakes. And so I was like, okay, if it's applicable to that, what else could I maybe, focus this on? But it's funny that you say that because, being an instructor, I meet all different walks. And it's funny because I usually ask that very same question, how'd you get into this? And it's 50-50. Like, some of them are like, oh, I'm a third generation. Or it's a flip side of the coin, like, oh, we drove by an airport one day and my parents pulled in to ask for directions. And I became best friends with the airport manager, like some random one-off deal. And then now it's their whole life,
Yeah.
So.
Well, speaking of whole life, Drew, your whole life has been immersed in aviation. Tell us about your background and kind of how you got to where you are now.
Oh gosh, mine is totally opposite from Faith and Dale's. I guess I knew at a very young age that I was going to be in this industry at some kind of level. I had no idea that I would be a business owner, but I originally wanted to be a pilot, and it was too expensive to become a pilot, so I became a mechanic. And 21 years later, I own my own business, and continuing. I'll be the second generation, and my daughter, who's 13, will hopefully be the third generation in our family. Yeah, Maggie. Actually, that's her right there.
All right.
Oh, that's cool.
At a Helicopters Inc. hangar in Atlanta, when she was probably 2-ish. So she's been in the industry just like I have been. And her grandfather is a CFI, and pretty much flies anything that Bell has made. So she literally can jump in any aircraft out here and go fly in it with any one of our customers, at any time, which is good for her. But
Yeah.
and I hope she knows that, she's going to hopefully pursue an aviation background, whether it's in helicopters or airplanes. But I prefer her to be in helicopters,
Yeah.
just because it's a family tradition for us. But yeah, I was basically born into this industry, so it's been a fun industry to be in. It's a very demanding industry to be in. It's very rewarding most of the time, but it's a very stable industry too. Helicopters don't fluctuate too much.
Yeah, I love our industry. You talk about the passion, and that picture above you, for the folks that are listening, man, that's an impactful photo right there. It kind of shows the legacy, and I can't see it too well, but it looks like your daughter's looking up at the helicopter, like kind of.
Oh yeah, she's pointing at it. I wish it would show a little better in the background, but I don't know.
Yeah, it looks great, and again, it just kind of highlights the passion of our industry.
Yes, for sure.
Dale, shifting gears to you, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because Drew brought up opening his own business. Mm-hmm. And you think back to your early time, as either a young kid or new in the industry. Did you ever envision a scenario where you're the leader of HeliLadder and you've developed these products that are transforming the industry?
I'll start off with this way, and just going back a couple of years. But when I was getting ready to close out of my high school years, there were classmates that were going into business, and they were going to get a business degree. And I recall thinking, you've got to be kidding me. Why would anyone do that? That was my level of business interest. Through my career, I really had no interest in business. I was perfectly content to be out in the flight line, marrying up a couple turbine engines or tracking and balancing. That was where I felt at home, and that was where I felt I excelled. My business venture started off very small, where I started making some specialty helicopter tools, tab tools and whatnot, because I was not satisfied with what the OEMs were making. And I developed a very small business making some custom tooling. And I was happy with that. It was pretty simple, pretty basic. Certainly had no aspirations to develop a business that we have. It wasn't in my blood, but I got to say it's been a pretty wild and exciting ride.
Yeah.
And certainly in a sense of like aviation, I was never bored in aviation. And certainly running this business is kind of a parallel track. There is not a day that I'm ever sitting back bored or wondering what I'm going to do, or did I accomplish anything today? So it's been a neat ride.
Yeah, that's the same exact way I learned. I was the same way. Business, what? I don't know how to run a business. Well, in 2016 is when I started mine, which probably was close to the time you started yours. I wouldn't have it any other way now.
Mm-hmm.
Dale or Drew, when you go back to the inception of the business, was it somebody that asked you a question, would you ever do this? Or how did that idea to own your business even come up?
I worked for a particular company that I wasn't real happy with management, and I put in my 2 weeks notice at this particular company, and they just said, go home, we don't need you anymore. Oh, okay. So I basically went right next door to another operation and took a job with them firefighting, 12 on, 12 off schedule. And I had already had my business plan kind of in the works, and I had my name picked out and all the paperwork that goes with the government side of it going. So when I worked the 12 on, 12 off schedule, it gave me an opportunity on my days off to come home and do maintenance here in North Carolina is where we're based now. But we lived in Georgia at that time, and I was traveling to North Carolina. But no, nobody just said, hey, would you be interested in doing this? I just did it. I just did it.
I think the hardest thing of any journey is the beginning, like the decision to actually do it. And then the first step that follows.
It's very scary when you go from somebody giving you a 2-week paycheck and it's going to be there every 2 weeks to, well, I better go to work or there's not going to be a paycheck. It's a big leap of faith, and pun intended. And you know how it goes, right?
Yeah.
And when you have a small child and a wife and a family and a mortgage and cars, and you got to be able, our first year's goals was just to be able to support our family, house payments, cars, foods, just normal everyday stuff, not make a ton of money, just make it. And we were successful at that. The second year was to make $100,000. So we made it past the first year. We're still here. We didn't starve to death. And, we blew past the $100,000 mark in like 8 months.
Wow.
So we were, not only did we make all the payments and we had food and all that, we made over $100,000, because I had never made over $100,000 before working for somebody. So that was always a big accomplishment for us. I can't recall what our goal was for the third year, but fast forward 2 or 3 years later, we ended up selling our home in Georgia and moving to North Carolina. And I started out with a small car in the beginning in 2016 doing maintenance. I would cram all of my equipment in as much as I could into a small car. Now we live in North Carolina. We lease a hangar. We're on an airport. We're now doing interviews with you guys. And we're looking to the future with building our own facility.
That leap of faith you talk about, again, going back to what I said earlier, that first step has got to be the scariest.
Oh gosh, yes,
being used to collecting a dependable paycheck. Dale, for you, I'm really interested to dive into your AMP background that got you to where you are. But let's again jump forward. What was that first step like? Your decision to said, I'm going to jump into both feet, and this is what I'm doing now. Verticon was epic. More than 600 companies, 15,000 attendees, and the cutting edge of vertical aviation technology. Next stop, Atlanta. The show floor is filling fast. Apply for space. Secure your spot now at the world's largest vertical aviation show, Verticon, powered by VAI at verticon.org.
It was a slow and terrifying one. I started the ladder design around 2011. It took us 3 years before we had a prototype that was ready to go into small-scale production. Admittedly, for the first few years, I was working as a flight line mechanic, traveling mechanic for a medical program. So I was on the road a lot and would just work at the business in the evenings, on the weekends when I was home. Over the course of years, kept seeing more and more potential with the business venture, with the concept. But when it came right down to it, the thought of leaving that full-time wage, I was working as a senior mechanic. I was being paid very well for my efforts. To leave that, to leave full benefits, to say, never mind, everything's going to hinge on the success of this business, was certainly very, very terrifying. At the same time, I had faith that we could pull it off, and just kind of had to go on that belief that we will do this. Failure wasn't an option, and we moved forward with it, left the full-time flight line, retired the Snap-on tools, and jumped in full bore.
Wow.
I had the good fortune, of course, for the first few years of having a steady income. I had the good fortune I could carry my prototypes around with me and test them in the field, get input from other people, fine-tune the design, tweak the design with actual experiential insight. And so it was actually a really nice blend for the early years to be continuing to work as a flight line mechanic with the equipment.
Yeah, that end user insight's important for any product, especially what you've designed, because you're able to see over the course of your career what lacked, and a lot of the stories that I read about, though, there's some glaring issues that arise, that you and Faith have had similar experiences, being that you both are in the helicopter air ambulance segment. So I'm kind of curious to hear you guys kind of go back and forth on what similarities you had. But let's start with your time in the helicopter air ambulance segment, Dale. Tell us how you got into that role and what your experience was like there.
The short story is my first aviation job was in the Gulf Coast, attending to a wide range of different aircraft serving the oil industry. And I hadn't been down in Louisiana for much more than a year and a half, and I was offered an opportunity to take care of a EMS aircraft, a Bell 222 in Texarkana, Texas, and it looked like an interesting opportunity. So that took me into aviation, hospital aviation, which I'm sure Faith will be able to ad lib into this. It's a really, really interesting field, very demanding, but very rewarding field. And I ended up staying with that for decades.
That's cool.
Working in the hospital aviation world.
Before we dig more into the helicopter air ambulance segment, I don't know, I have a hard time saying that, but the Bell 222, and as a kid, for me, that was such an impactful aircraft. That was, the basis for Airwolf and a lot of the stuff that I watched on TV. Talk about your experience working on that. What was that like?
The 222. I'll start off on a very positive note. The 222 aesthetically is probably one of the most beautiful helicopters ever built. It had some wonderful attributes to it as an aircraft. Had a nodal beam suspension for the transmission, and when that aircraft was tracked and balanced correctly, it really slid through the air nicely. I believe it was the first helicopter to be single pilot IFR rated. It had, although antique by today's standards, it had a color mapping radar, heated windshields, bird-proof windshields. It really was an advanced aircraft, but the LTS 101 engines that it had were inherently problematic in a multitude of ways, and the aircraft developed a very bad reputation because of the engine reliability, and ultimately it killed the production run. But very, very beautiful aircraft. It was an aircraft that I had a love-hate relationship with. It was a knuckle-busting, back-breaking, demoralizing aircraft to keep airworthy.
It sounds like a song.
Yep. But when that bird was flying through the air with those big old blades, had that Huey sound, but a little bit on steroids. It was an entity all of its own, and pretty neat aircraft.
Aside from the engine itself, what was the most difficult system to work on that aircraft?
Back then, it was certainly part of the autopilot system. We had a Svina autopilot that had no maintenance manual. And I'm dating myself here. All we had was 2 foot by 3 foot blueprint pages, paper pages. And that was our wiring diagram. And that was how we troubleshot the autopilot system. I understand Drew has the 222 parked in his hangar right now. And I wish I could just hop on an airplane and come down there and give him a hand. But
that was the most beautiful description for a 222 I think I've ever heard. Well done, Dale. Well done. Right. Yes, we do have one here. It's a corporate machine, and everything that Dale said is 100% right. It's a fantastic aircraft when it's running and flying and maintained well and tracked and balanced. I deal with a lot of Bell products at my shop, and the only other faster aircraft is a 429. That 222 moves. That sucker is fast. When ours has retractable gear, that thing will do 150 knots across the ground, no problem. Oh. Easy.
Faith, have you had a chance to work on the 222 at all?
No, we actually had one in A&P school. It was retired, and they used it as an example. Yeah, you're gonna laugh because it was dated and it was kind of old, but we did get to tinker on it a little bit, but most of our classes weren't modeled after it. So I do have some pictures of one. It's like a baby blue color, and it's got the retractable gear, and it's pretty wild looking. But I don't have much exposure to twin engine aircrafts yet. So I'm super stoked this fall, or actually winter. I'm going to go to 429 school
Awesome.
So I'm super pumped.
All right.
I've been pretty well exposed to the light category of Bell products. So that's kind of my wheelhouse for the time being, and a little bit with MDs, just a tiny bit. But yeah, so I'm kind of right there with you guys with the Bell products and tried and true. So, but yeah, we had the only one that I guess I've got a little bit of skin in the game was we had a Bell 430 that we had at the last company I worked for, and I remember it was a personal owned by the gentleman that owned the company. And so they only put like 10 hours on it a year. And so half the time we were doing, turn inspections that we'd just done, but there was no flights put in between. Yeah. And I made the mistake of, they're like, oh, if anyone wants any overtime, like, the 430 needs some work. And I'm like, well, I said, I don't want to get in your guys' way and ask a bunch of questions about the airframe, but I know it's got two basically 407 engines. So I'll just do the engines. And everyone's like, oh, thank God. And I'm like, what did I just sign up for? I was like, why are you guys saying that? And then I very quickly figured out it's not the most cumbersome thing to work on the inner portions of the engines. Mm-hmm. So I very quickly realized why they let me volunteer for that. But that's the only exposure I've had. So
that's great. I can see Drew and Dale both shaking their heads like they knew what was about to happen.
Oh yeah.
Like, here's your piece of plywood.
That class of aircraft, it's a shame that they didn't do everything possible to keep that aircraft line going and improve on it, because and I'm gonna go off here a little bit, but the modern aircraft versus the 222 or 230s, I'll include the 430 in that. They're just built different. They're not as sturdy. They're like that 222, man. That thing, if it's maintained properly, that's a well-built helicopter. Yeah. You stack a 505 up against that deuce, it's like an oak tree versus a soda can. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
I've heard so many people say that. Like when a new product comes out, it always gets a bad rep. No matter who produces it, I feel like it's our normal industry. Everyone's like, I don't, what was wrong with what was there before, and I get that to a degree. But I've even worked with techs that have only been exposed, and you probably know this, Drew, like only 206s, and they still are like 407. Bah. They're like, nah, I would rather take a 206 any day. And I love the 407, but it's just kind of like they know what they know, and it just takes a little bit for it to work the kinks out. But that's funny to hear with the larger stuff too, because I don't have much exposure, so it's interesting hearing you guys talk about the 222.
Yeah, well, there's nothing really in that class anymore. The 429 is it's just a different fuselage. Like the modern helicopters aren't nearly as sexy as a 222, 230, or 430. And I'll fight you till the day the cows come home about that. Although the 407 is a nice machine, but those three helicopters are just slick. There's no other way to put it. They're slick.
It's funny, Faith, you bring that concept up, because in law enforcement, it was the same way. Law enforcement officers love to complain. And they hate, they hate the way it is, but they don't want change either. It's like, what are we really working towards here? It's just funny that our segments are similar in that way. Dale, for you, if someone were to find themselves in a hangar with a 222 and they're, hey, congratulations, you're going to now work on this, what would the one piece of advice be that you give to that person?
Boy, sit down and prepare for some patience and perseverance. That this aircraft requires tender, loving care, and it will require a lot of it, but it will perform. If you perform your maintenance properly, that aircraft will perform. I could go down a long list of different things to be monitoring: the flow fence actuator, the tail rotor stinger, you name it. I could go down that list, and that's why I'd love to get out to see Drew's aircraft that he's taken care of. And
we'd love to have you so you could give us some pointers. There's probably 10 deuce mechanics in the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
There's not very many.
Of a rare breed, and certainly at this stage a dying breed. But if I can pull it off, I'll be making a trip out your way. It'd be a kick to do, just to see your facility, see what you've been able to develop so far, and of course walk around that triple deuce and
love on
point
a little
at a few
bit.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, that tribal knowledge you're talking about, Dale, is really what we're wanting to capture. You know, a lot of folks, once they retire, they're done. They're not going to be able to give that knowledge back to anybody else. So to pick, someone like your brain who's had an opportunity to work on, what turns out to be a very unique platform with not many folks that are qualified to work on that. Really cool. So thanks for sharing some of your insight there. Drew, with your knowledge on the 222, anything you'd throw in there?
I would say that I would also add a lot of patience. I haven't seen a deuce actually, I saw this deuce when I first started my helicopter career at HAS Corporation up in Pittsburgh when it was HAS Corporation. And this particular helicopter was painted green, but I never really worked on it. So, I've gained a lot of experience on the deuce in the past couple of months, and it's I always wondered why some of the older mechanics took forever to do things, especially on the deuce. As simple things like pulling the main drive shafts out. If you don't know the little tricks, reading the book and the book says this, and there may be a better way to do it to achieve the same result, which is tribal knowledge stuff, is totally different. I thought I was just going to get in there with my ratchet, my extension, and, pop them drive shafts out, stick them on the bench, repack them, and, put them back together and put them back in the helicopter. Well, I was wrong. I was really wrong. Unfortunately, it took a lot of effort to get those drive shafts out. Matter of fact, I had to take the starter out of the way. I had to get the shroud out of the way. It wasn't just it wasn't taking the K-flex out, right, or something like that. It was a lot more in depth. And back in, I hate to say the old days, but older days where tool technology wasn't as good, like for instance, ratcheting wrenches or things of that nature, or special ratchets that tool manufacturers have come up with that aid in getting that task completed, whereas the old school guys would just have to one flat at a time to get it torqued or undone, So a simple 600-hour 12-month on this deuce turned into 2 main drive shaft coupling replacements. We pulled the mast out, took the blades off, pulled the mast out, pulled the transmission out. So it was a 0 to 100 in right quick, So, but like Dale said, if you maintain it properly, that thing will run.
I can see Dale's smile, like you can identify with exactly what he's saying. What's running through your mind as he's talking through that?
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability, so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com.
Oh, pulling drive shafts and the wrestling match associated with those. And yes, we had both the luxury and the challenge in the early hospital years as a field mechanics. We'd do all our own drive shaft repacks. We'd pull the mass out. We'd do our engine overhauls in the shop. We really had the wide range of being able to do the entire aircraft maintenance. It's a little bit harder to do that now, especially with the legacy aircraft. The need to kind of send out the drive shafts for overhaul or the transmission is a little bit more highly elevated, what we had to do. But it was an interesting aircraft by all means.
And Drew talked about some of the early tool technology. Is that what kind of drove you, Dale, to want to make tools that were, let's say, better, but different in the way that you created them in those early days?
Oh, by all means. And it was directly related to the 222. The blades on that aircraft, oh gosh, they got a cord probably about 29, almost 30 inches. They're big blades,
they're big.
And they have really big tabs on them. As all aircraft, but especially with the big bladed aircraft, those tabs will wash out over time and your track will change and you'll start picking up a vibration. So tracking and balancing of the triple deuce was an ongoing process. One of the things in my earlier years with that, I learned to, once you're done with tracking and balance your aircraft, you make record of where all the tabs are when it's smooth. And if 6 months later, pilot says, hey, we're picking up a little bounce at 140 knots, I'd order up the tab tool from my corporate office. I'd put it up on there, and I could see, hey, a red blade washed out 2 degrees. I'd pop that back up to where it was, do a test flight. If we're running smooth, we're done and in service. Simple as that. However, what I found out was that the different tab tools coming out of Bell Helicopter were all engraved differently. So 0 degrees on one tab tool might be 3 degrees up on another tool, might be 1 degree down on another tool. And I learned you can't do that unless you have your own tool set, because your reference mark changed. And so my very first tool I made was a trim tab tool for the 222, so I could have one at my own base. They were expensive tools from Bell Helicopter, and the company was only going to buy so many of them, and they'd float around throughout the nation. So I made my own tab tool set. And ultimately, that greatly reduced my workload because I could make those tab tweaks quickly and easily. It increased the mission availability of the aircraft because we weren't out of service waiting for track and balance equipment. And of course, then that provided a higher level of patient care because the aircraft was flying instead of being out of service for a vibration.
Dale, I'd imagine you have some folks that are listening right now, scratching their head, wondering if the work they've been putting in is a result of what you're talking about. I'm sure, track and balance is one of those things that is frustrating, I think, for everybody. It seemingly takes forever sometimes. And other times you're like, holy cow, it happened in first or second shot. Yeah. Faith, I see you nodding your head. You can relate to that?
Yeah, everybody jokes, and I made we have like office memes around this place, and we made a meme, and it said the new tech, when he realizes he's moved all the pitch links in the wrong direction, he's like placed, because everybody's had some type of a story with a helicopter from hell that they just cannot get tracked and balance. And usually they find out it's not anything that they did. It's something else in the mix that they weren't taking into account, and the rotables that caused it. So yeah.
We've all been there.
When you're at that point that you're questioning the box, your sanity, the tech rep, everybody involved, it makes for a long day sometimes.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Oh,
no. We've all been in that boat.
Well, Dale, as you kind of reflect on your time as an AMP, you talked about working for the air ambulance segment. There are a lot of impactful missions that y'all are a part of in that segment of the industry. But are there things that come to mind as impactful? Whether it was, an incident that you participated in some way, or just some part of that early career as an AMP that comes back to you and strikes you as impactful.
Oh, very, very much so. And I'll actually answer that with reference to 2 particular flight requests at the hospital I was at. The first one early in my career, went in to take care of the deuce, had a 150-hour inspection to do on one of the engines. And part of that was inspect the fuel manifold and injectors for evidence of seepage. And I get back up in there with my mirror, taking a good look, and lo and behold, there's evidence. We got a fuel leak back here on the manifold. So I do the customary troubleshooting, pull the igniter circuit breaker, set the rotor brake, crack open the throttle, motor the engine for 30 seconds, and then go back there and see, do we have leak coming out? Yep, we got an injector leaking. We didn't have any seals in stock. And so we had to ground the aircraft hard time for the next day or so until we get seals for that manifold. And so the rest of the day was spent finishing up the rest of the inspection and then just kind of giving the aircraft tender loving care. Since it's out of service, this is an opportunity to take care of other projects. That afternoon, we get a flight request for potential drowning. And flight team comes out and says, hey, are we good to go? And I said, nope, we're hard down. We're grounded. And there wasn't another helicopter probably within 100 miles at that time in Central Oregon. So the patient had to go by ground ambulance. Turned out it was a 5-year-old boy. And I never knew, of course, had the aircraft been available, would the outcome been better, because he ended up being brought in and he didn't make it. He died. He had fallen in an irrigation canal and died. And always struck me heavy on, could I have done better to change that event? But anyway, so they brought the child in. Later on, one of the nurses came out and just kind of said, yeah, it's too bad we couldn't make that flight. Little 5-year-old boy, he passed away. So that afternoon, I close off my shift and I go home, and I had the luxury of my 5-year-old boy coming to the door to greet Dad and give me a hug.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a heartbreaking moment, thinking that some other dad out there doesn't have a 5-year-old boy today.
Yeah.
And that really set me down the course of, as a mechanic, I have a responsibility, two primary responsibilities. One, the aircraft must be airworthy. That's a non-negotiable. It must be airworthy. The second is it needs to be mission ready, available for service at the highest rate possible. And a component of that mission readiness is my actions, my preparations as a mechanic. And recognizing on this particular event, the lack of a handful of $5 seals is what kept us out of service and possibly kept us from making that flight, set me down the path of how do I change my actions? How do I change the program's processes? How do I influence my employer's process of how do you support maintenance? How do you support quality maintenance? And there's a wide variety of things that impact quality maintenance. It's going to be your hangar facilities, your lighting, the training applied to the mechanics, to staffing levels, to shifts, to hours worked, all those things that play into promoting quality maintenance. And so that moment of realizing I had possibly an influence on that child's survival really made me very, very serious and committed to doing better. Fast forward 5 years later, I go in one day for, I think we had a 300-hour inspection on the Deuce. Work through that process. Inspection goes like clockwork because I had been petitioning for better lighting in the hangar. I had been petitioning to get rid of the distractions of the flight team coming in, visiting when I'm working on the aircraft. I had worked to develop more professional standards, making sure I reviewed all the inspection criteria prior to the inspection, had all parts and tooling pulled prior to the inspection, made sure everything had been done to allow me to work efficiently. So 5 years later, working on a 300-hour inspection, I bring it to a close in prompt and professional time. I'm sitting at the desk, finishing off my logbook entry, and flight team comes in and says, hey, we've had a real bad accident out in Eastern Oregon. Are we good to go? And I said, give me one moment, finish off my sign-off, approve for return to service in an airworthy condition, hand the logbook to the pilot, and I said, rock on.
Wow.
They fly away. About an hour or so later, hour and a half, I hear that old 222 coming in. And by the tone of the blades, 222 kind of sounds like the old Huey on steroids. And I'm hearing the pop, 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 the blades. And I can say, wow, they're coming in fast. And as they start pulling back on the cyclic to slow down, that pop goes into a snap, 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 which tells me they're really coming in hot. And that 222 comes in, flares aggressively, and lands. And right away, the ER crew is coming out with their stretcher, and they load up the patient, take him inside. Mission accomplished. The tail end of that story is a little bit later, the nurse comes out and says, hey, that was an important flight, because some of your air medical flights don't turn out to be that critical, but this one was. And they said this was really an important one to make. All right, I go home, get home for dinner. Now my 10-year-old boy gives me a little hug, says, hey, how's your day, Dad? Go, Dad. Excellent. Have dinner. I get a phone call. It's from one of my old high school classmates. I probably hadn't talked with him in a decade. One of my old buds in high school. And he says, Dale, you still out in Oregon doing that helicopter thing? I said, yeah, I work at the hospital here in Bend. He says, well, my brother had a bad accident today and they flew him in.
Oh.
And he just wanted to check if I could go in and, check on his brother. 5 years before, the patient didn't survive because the aircraft wasn't available, or potentially. And now it was a clear situation where, because the aircraft was available, because I and my team had performed at our best, the aircraft was available, and this patient, who probably would not have survived, did. And it turned out to be the brother of one of my old best friends.
What?
Wow.
And so I look back on the 5-year-old who actually his name was Michael. And I actually kept the little newspaper clipping of Michael's death on my toolbox for the better part of my career. I'd open my toolbox every day, and that picture of Michael was there looking back at me. And he was always my inspiration to do better, to perform better, to be willing to speak up and be an activist for maintenance. That boy's passing ultimately helped me refine my processes and procedures and professionalism that led directly to the life-saving flight of a young man I actually knew in high school.
Wow.
And it was a pretty cool deal. And Faith, I'm sure, can talk about this in hospital aviation. It's extraordinarily challenging and demanding, but there's that extra special benefit of what you're doing that mitigates those challenges and those late nights and those times on the road.
Yeah, that is the most impactful story that I've heard in a long time.
Same.
You know, it illustrates and highlights so much of what we do in this industry, how important the things that we do day in, day out are. You know, I don't think anybody goes to work on any given day with an understanding of what it is they're going to respond to.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what segment of helicopter aviation you're a part of. You don't know if you're going in to respond to a drowning, to a vehicle accident, to a shooting, to an officer down, your friend who's down calling for help. Our ability to professionally respond to those incidents and make an impact is upon us every day to be professional, you know, and I love the way you highlighted that. And you took something it tore your heart
Mm-hmm.
with the drowning of that 5-year-old, and you turned it into something positive. You know, you took that and challenged yourself. And then you can see just 5 years later, the effort that you put in made a difference in someone you know.
It made a difference. And I want to also clarify that, not so much as, wow, look what Dale performed here, what he did. It really speaks to the bigger picture of aviation. My ability to perform at my best that day was partially because hospital administration had listened to my requests for improved hangar facilities. It was because the folks at the corporate office in the parts department shipped me parts when I needed. It was because the overhaul shop did a standout overhaul in that swash plate assembly that I'd put on a month before. It was all these other people, you know, well beyond my immediate focus that contributed to that flight being made. It was the tech reps I'd call when I'd have an autopilot problem. It was, you know, just this wide scope of people in all different levels of aviation that it all came to culmination with a flight request for a bad accident. But all of their efforts contributed to that. And that's the neat part about aviation. There's a broad spectrum of community here that contributes to a successful flight.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, in most circumstances, when there's a successful mission that's completed, like what you just described, a lot of times people, all they see and think of is the air crew that was there. Mm-hmm. They're not thinking of the folks behind the scenes. Dale, what you did, all the folks that you talked about who made the facilities the way they need to be to make your job doable and successful. Mm-hmm. There's so many folks behind the scenes that are all pulling in the same direction to make these things positive. And that's what I love about our community. I think that's why because we're so mission focused in the helicopter industry, I think that's where you see this tightness kind of come together, because we're all kind of working towards the same end goal, which you eloquently were able to talk about. That story that you told, I think, needs to be played for people over and over and over again, and talk about the importance of teamwork, and attention to detail and all the things that go with that. Faith,
I would like to add something to that.
Yeah.
That's a I'm sure you guys have had human factors training, and in our world, and when I say our world, the helicopter world, helicopters were designed to save people and help people. And it's always hard to tell somebody no in this world. You know what I mean? It took me a long time to be able to have the confidence to say, no, we're not doing this, and thank God Dale had enough attitude and professionalism to say, you know what? No, the helicopter's not right. We can't take it. If something negative would have happened with the helicopter, not only did the young person, the 5-year-old, not make it, now we have to worry about everybody in the helicopter not making it. So, I really admire you for telling somebody no when it was a difficult decision to make. I mean, absolutely. Hey, if the helicopter was good to go, 100% send it, but that's part of human factors right there is the ability to, hey, we really need the helicopter for this situation, as the maintainer, the mechanic, or the CEO, or the guy sweeping the floor, we all have to make good decisions. And Dale, that was a good decision. I'm glad you made that decision. That was a tough one in the end, but if young people could learn to say, no, I'm not going to do that, instead of being easily influenced, that would go a long way. I think a lot of things that have happened recently in the helicopter industry, negative, have been because people aren't doing the right thing, to be honest with you. But kudos to you, Dale, for standing up and saying, no, we can't take the helicopter. It's not safe. So that was awesome.
Yeah. That's a great point. In public safety and on the Hangar Z podcast, we talk about a lot of it when it comes to aircrew selection. Exactly what you said needs to be part of the screening process. You need to have somebody selected as an aircrew member who can tell a commanding officer no. A lot of times you have a lieutenant, a captain calling the hangar and saying, hey, I need you to do this. Well, they're used to calling other divisions within the police department and nobody questioning the request they put in. If you do question that request, there's something wrong with you. Whereas in aviation, the outcome of a bad request is catastrophic. So we talk about that a lot. And I 100% agree with you. Kudos again to you, Dale, for saying no. Again, given the circumstances of that incident, it's hard to say no, but it was the right call for sure. Thank you to our sponsor, HeliLadder. Enhance your fall protection and maintenance efficiency with HeliLadder, the industry standard of ladder workstands. The iconic orange MX5 system is fully modular and compatible with countless aircraft models for any type of operation, making you money by preventing accidents and reducing maintenance errors. For a free quote and special discounts, visit HeliLadder.com. Focus on your work, not your balance.
To echo what you guys are saying, and I don't know about you guys, but I know when I got into aviation, I wasn't thinking about the facets that helicopters were used. You know what I mean? I'm like, this is just a really cool machine. Like, I get to be in and around. I'm off the ground. Like, that concept is just insane, like what these machines can do. Not exactly what they're used for. You know what I mean? Like, most of the helicopters that I had maintained prior to being an AMS, they were a tool, right? So they're getting you your news, they're setting power poles, they're it's used as a tool in your toolbox. But search and rescue in EMS truly is a whole nother animal. And just like you said, I think every mechanic has that aha moment where they're like, wow, this is really changing people's lives and getting them to the level of care that they need very quickly. I had something similar happen to me. The company I work for, we keep a lot of people very, I don't want to say detached, like the mechanics, but they'll tell you, hey, they kind of keep you in the dark a little bit about calls, possible patients, things like that, because they don't want you to make rash decisions. But we do tell our mechanics, hey, we absolutely don't want you to rush, but we need you to move with purpose. So we need you to not dilly or dally. Like, you got to get this situated for us. I'm not in the medical industry for a reason. That has never been something that I could have handled. Like, when I mean that, like as a nurse or some type of a practitioner, that was not in Faith's wheelhouse ever. But this is kind of like where worlds collide. And so I do get kind of a front row seat to, different things that happen or that the helicopter is capable of. I'll never forget, my story is way, way less impactful, but I came into the base one day and we had people in and out all the time. It's kind of a communal space. So we would have people from headquarters come in and there were audits. And so it wasn't, a weird thing to see somebody you didn't know in a collared shirt and be like, oh, I'm such and such, and we're here to inspect this or that. And I felt bad because someone knocked on the front door of the hangar, or the base rather. And I walked up and I was like, hey, how can I help you? Because my crew was they just sat down to eat a meal. I was like, I got it, guys. And he's like, hey, and he was older gentleman and he got really choked up. And he's like, hey, who was on hitch last Tuesday? And I was like, I'm the mechanic. I'm not a EMT or a nurse. I said, I can go grab them if you'd like. And he's like, well, I would sure appreciate it because I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. And him and his wife were getting really choked up. And I was like, oh, okay. It was like 1 second. So my crew, they're so desensitized, to this kind of stuff. They're like, Doug's here. Doug's up and walking around. He's at the front door. And I'm like, yeah, this gentleman said that whoever was on last Tuesday. And so they came out and they introduced himself, and they brought like baskets of stuff for the base. And they were like, just so thankful. And like both of them, the whole place was getting choked up. And he's like, I'm really sad that my first helicopter ride, I don't remember. and they were like, well, you can go out and see it if you want. Well, we'll sit you in there in the front seat if you want. And he's like, really? And so they took him out there and they took a bunch of pictures, and it was just like, wow, it was really cool to see firsthand, like what the work that I do, like what the result is. You know what I mean? Like, not that, setting power poles and ENG work and some of the other things, the really cool jobs that helicopters can do is less important, because it's just different. It's so different to see the lives firsthand that it touches. So yeah, I totally understand what you mean by the mission ready thing. After that, I feel like I hope everyone has a little moment like that where it really just sets things into place, so that like, wow, okay, you're right. I do need to have more stuff on hand. I shouldn't sit here and scroll through my phone while I take a 10-minute water break and kind of chill out. Like, obviously don't push yourself to the extreme where you're going to make mistakes. But absolutely, after that, that's why as an instructor, I tell the guys, I'm like, hey, do not rush. It's not what I'm telling you to do, but you need to move with purpose. And I usually try to tell that story. So I can't wait to reiterate, Dale, what you were talking about. That was really moving. Like I said, I wish we could get a video of you and show that to new hires that come in. I think that would be great. That story would resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah, that's that tribal knowledge that is critically important to share across the industry. This is why what we do is important, and you illustrated that really well. Drew, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Go for it.
Sorry to bring you in on the heels of that story, but the same question to you. As far as your career, when you look back over the time you've had as an AMP, as a business owner in this helicopter industry, and even as a young child being affiliated with the industry, what strikes you as an impactful mission thing that you were a part of in the helicopter industry?
Well, most recently, last year we had the massive flooding in western North Carolina. I'm sure you guys saw that. And that was one of the largest helicopter operations probably ever in the United States, civilian-wise. And I don't want to discount airplanes because they were a big part of that, but we're helicopter people, right? I got to be a part of that. A local county sheriff department has a UH-1H, and we got it from San Bernardino County, California, a couple years ago, and it came over here on a flatbed, and we put it together. They got it flying, and it came to my hangar for its yearly inspection in October. We all knew this hurricane was coming. It was going to be a nasty event. So I called up their chief pilot and said, hey, if you want the Huey ready for this, you need to tell me now so I can work over the weekend to get it right, because you may need it because it's coming. Well, long story short, we ended up doing that. We got the helicopter out and got it fixed up and inspected, and all the normal stuff you would do with a helicopter. The lady that flies it, her name is Michaela, and she probably has no business flying a Huey because she's so small, but she does a fantastic job. So we got together, and I said, well, we need to come up here and do ground runs and track balance and torque checks and blah, blah, blah. Well, the hurricane hit, and it was a mess, like we all saw. They didn't have any business flying this helicopter in the mountains. So I volunteered to crew the Huey for them for 30 hours.
Wow.
So we went to Western North Carolina with the Huey. And when you're in the midst of all the other helicopters that were there, holy cow, what an event. What an event. So we did that. I crewed the helicopter for them. We went heli camping because there was nothing up there, right? We were trying to move supplies with everybody else. And so that was really, really awesome to be a part of. I really didn't do much other than load the helicopter, unload the helicopter, make sure people that we were moving were safe. You know, so that's one of the more recent things that I've done that was pretty impactful. The other thing that's real impactful as a business owner, and this really doesn't have anything to do with EMS or like emergency situations. My daughter is part of the Subware Patrol here on the airport, and they scheduled a field trip to come to my facility. And Dale, you'll get a kick out of this. We had the Huey in here, and we had the Deuce in here, right? So, of course, helicopters have a lot of wow factor. When people roll up to the hangar and they go, wow, man, those are cool, especially kids, right? Like teenager-ish, maybe a year, 10 to 15-year-olds. And they had an absolute ball crawling all over that Huey and getting in it and taking pictures. And then I said, well, come look at the baggage compartment on this 222. Look how big this thing is. We stuffed 5 cadets from the Civil Air Patrol in the baggage compartment of that Deuce and shut the door. Anyway, long story short, it's awesome to be able to show people different platforms and what they're used for. And, we have corporate machines, we have workhorses, we have, there's 2 429 EMS helicopters here. So when people come to my facility, they get a chance to see a lot of stuff. And it's very rewarding for me as a senior mechanic or business owner now to see, young people come look at the industry, because it's a big world, right? And this is aviation's one small little piece, and the helicopter world is even smaller. So it's always nice to see kids and even grown adults come up here and look at some of these machines, and they're like, wow, I didn't know this existed, So that's kind of the rewarding thing for me right now.
Thank you for tuning in to part 1 of this conversation. Be sure to catch part 2. It's packed with more insights you won't want to miss.
Stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors.
Verticon was epic. More than 600 companies, 15,000 attendees, and the cutting edge of vertical aviation technology. Next stop, Atlanta. The show floor is filling fast. Apply for space. Secure your spot now at the world's largest vertical aviation show, Verticon, powered by VAI at verticon.org.
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability, so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com.
Thank you to our sponsor, HeliLadder. Enhance your fall protection and maintenance efficiency with HeliLadder, the industry standard of ladder workstands. The iconic orange MX-5 system is fully modular and compatible with countless aircraft models for any type of operation, making you money by preventing accidents and reducing maintenance errors. For a free quote and special discounts, visit HeliLadder.com. Focus on your work, not your balance. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Vertical MRO Podcast, brought to you by Vertical HeliCASTS and in partnership with Vertical Magazine. We hope you enjoyed our in-depth conversation with Dale Neubauer and Drew Benton Jr., where they shared their inspiring journeys in the helicopter community, discussed the importance of teamwork and communication, and highlighted the critical role maintenance plays in safety and patient outcomes. A special thanks to Dale for sharing his personal story and insights into the founding of HeliLadder, driven by a passion to revolutionize aircraft maintenance safety and efficiency. We appreciate your time and engagement, and we look forward to bringing you more stories from the helicopter industry. Until next time, be safe and stay innovative. Catch you next time on the Vertical MRO Podcast.